like I could when I was small, and it's so picturesque. Looking through the crystal ball, can you picture this? And it is inside.
Ciao, and welcome to Gio's Paintbrush, where 5 minutes is all it takes to be blown away by one of the world's greatest artists. It's no accident that fascists and other groups who desire to seize, consolidate, and hold absolute power over any people, whether that power be military, political, social, or religious, have always feared the creative, original thinking of the artist as a primary threat to their objectives. And when celebrated 20th century painter Max Beckmann had his art declared degenerate in 1937 by the maniacal fascist dictator Adolf Hitler, Beckmann responded with the subject of today's show, a 1937 self-portrait that foreshadowed the danger, the bloodshed that would result from the Nazis' rise to power. But in the same portrait, Beckmann also upheld the resilient, defiant spirit of the artist, even though trapped, cut off from his former life and from his art. While Beckmann watched the Nazis establish totalitarian rule in his native Germany back in the 1930s, the issue of artists confronting an oppressive, violent regime, hell-bent not just on censorship, but on the total destruction of such men and their artistic expression, well, it was not new in the 1930s, and sadly, it can still be found today. Thanks for joining us.
Max Beckmann, national hero, respected teacher, and universally acknowledged master artist one day, and degenerate threat to national security, forced to flee his own country the next. And so it has always been for independent-minded, creative thinkers and artists, whom fate has placed in a fascist, totalitarian state. Guys like Beckmann were just too damn dangerous for the Nazis to keep around. And not because Beckmann would take up arms or embark on a campaign of sabotage against a small-minded, hate-filled, brutally oppressive regime. Beckmann, who was not Jewish, had volunteered as a medic of sorts in the Great War, but was no soldier, at least no Rambo. The Nazis, who had seized hundreds of Beckmann's paintings in the years after Hitler came to power in 1933, labeling his work as degenerate art in 1937, as part of a Nazi-sponsored exhibit of all the German fascists deemed subversive and threatening to their authority. They feared Beckmann's intellect, his integrity, his creativity, his originality, and, of course, the possibility that he would ultimately turn his brush in their direction. This self-portrait of Beckmann's, dated 1937, is thought to be the artist's last painting done in Germany before he and his wife fled to Amsterdam. In terms of genre, it is, at once, an insightful portrait, a revealing history painting, and a rather unique example of expressionism, which sacrificed realistic detail in order to demonstrate an emotional truth, without moving completely into the world of abstraction. Beckmann explored each of these genres in his career and more, but according to art historians, he produced a remarkable number of prints and paintings in Germany, Holland, and eventually the United States. After the war, Beckmann taught art in Missouri, Colorado, and California, and died suddenly, in fact, of cardiac arrest on a stroll to the Met in New York City in 1959. Beckmann explored these with such variety and originality that the body of his work defies any single genre or artistic movement. In this fascinating painting, Beckmann portrays himself as a dapper, well-heeled, and celebrated man, once the toast of a nation. Note the stylish tux, ivory skin, and confident contrapposto pose. But at the same time, he's trapped on the stairwell, with no visible way out, up or down, and the look on his face is clearly one of grave concern, of worry, of angst. And Beckmann appears to be looking over his shoulder with a widened, discerning left eye, helping direct the viewer's gaze to the strange and even violent colors and forms marching by behind him with long black boots, a heavy, chaotic and angry application of paint with sharp, pointy tips, and an ominous blood-red backdrop that foreshadows, historically, the cost to Germany and the world of the rise of German fascism. And what's with the hands? This is a guy who draws, who paints, who makes his living, and probably even lives, through the images he creates with his hands, which enable him to transform an idea in his head into something tangible, something capable of communicating his ideas across the country and ultimately the world. But in the 1937 self-portrait, Beckmann portrays his hands as grotesquely large, limp, deformed, perhaps the degenerate hands of a so-called degenerate painter, stripped of his genius, his status, seemingly incapable of careful artistic endeavor, clumsy and kind of just hanging there, rendered useless by the change in political climate. And I think there's a toughness to Beckmann's facial expression, nearly a scowl, which suggests that while trapped and understandably anxious about the change in his government and the rise of a senseless, violent totalitarian state, he isn't about to give up the ghost, to stop making art, to abandon his individualism and his ideas. In this sense, perhaps the supersized hands suggest a powerful artistic resistance to fascism and Beckmann's own understanding of the power of art, as well as his individual drive to make art whatever the risks. Certainly, he would go on to create hundreds more works in the post-war years before his death in 1959. This painting possesses as much relevance today as it did in the middle years of the 20th century, since, sadly, there are many groups, neo-fascist at heart, who remain threatened by free thinking, by the new, the bold, and the original, including religious extremists of all denominations, from the KKK and the Westboro Baptist Church to Al-Qaeda, not to mention less odious but equally small-minded men obsessed with wealth and political power, or those who, motivated by fear of the unfamiliar, seek to limit the definition of art to only those works that reflect their personal values or narrow perspectives on life and the world. I like the tough awareness Beckmann projects here, and the poise, in spite of the danger building just behind him, seeming to stand his ground, leaning against the railing casually, almost comfortably, though clearly trapped. I do not weep, Beckmann once said. I loathe tears, for tears are a sign of slavery. And that's the aware but defiant spirit he captures so uniquely here. Grazie mille e ciao.